Welcome to the E-Duchy of the Mosaic Ark. Do you know how to behave yet? So we're out here on the frontier. We got some ladies, we got some gentlemen. We're dealing with the booger trolls. We hope they learn to behave after last week's episode. But now that we're all here on this ship, in this castle, in this community, do we know how to act like Christians? Do we know what Jesus would do? Well, maybe. Do we know how to be civilized as Christians? That's our question tonight on the Mosaic Ark. What were you just saying about who you weren't going to let in your channel? I think there should be a quiz to whether or not you can board our ark. You need to know how to behave. Are you guys anxious yet? What are you going to do to them to make sure that they know how to behave on our ship?
I'm just kicking people out. Just off. You're all off.
I mean, the
out.
booger trolls.
You're banned. I don't care.
Do you think they care? I mean, this is
no. Sorry.
You think they won't care? I mean, we have our very select crew listening to us live. Welcome, everyone. You get to join us in the actual live streaming and the conversation and the development of art and goodness and beauty. The true, the good, and the beautiful, right? That's what we're streaming in aid of. But obviously we're you and I, Kilts, are out here, other than just in the very polite confines of our unauthorized TV chat, braving the storms of those who would or wouldn't join our E-Duchy. I'm not sure.
Yeah. You're provoking me to have a rant.
Please do. Right? No, I mean, the rants I want to have, I was like, okay, do you know what my life is like as a professor? I'm constantly in anxiety, right? Right? Have I said something wrong? Am I leading this discussion correctly? And then I realized, of course, one, I have very well behaved students because they're in my classroom, right? And so of course they're going to behave well because they want to learn, right? And then I go back out into my internet channel or my chat. No, actually my chat is very well behaved too. I wonder where I'm finding ones that aren't.
In the surrounding duchies.
Oh my gosh. And then of course you end up in interminable and bitchy. We're not talking about ladies today. We're going to do We're going to do a completely special stream of like probably an entire year. I don't know. How long does it take women to learn how to behave? That there are rules, and then there are rules, and we are all out here in the frontier trying to figure out what they are.
Well, the other E-Duchies, I mean, I quit them all because I realized there are no artists in those E-Duchies. So I left.
Well, this frustrates me too. It's like there's so we should have a purpose for being on our ship. We should have a purpose for being in our E-Duchy, but It's like, is that the definition of civilization? We need to have a purpose together. Maybe it is. Maybe we're done. we did the stream tonight in 20 minutes. No,
Not even. We did it in less than 8 minutes.
Ken has given us a super chat. Therefore, he gets to have his voice heard. There is courtesy here, which is gift giving. Count me in for E-Duchy. Will there be cake? Oh yes, definitely cake. Silent Draco says include harumph. Isaiah Nandy Z, good evening. Silent Draco, good evening all. Yes, welcome everyone. We need to learn how to behave. Now you guys who are with us right now all know how to behave. You've been very polite. You've said hello. These are all important lessons. Are they Christian? Are they necessarily Christian? And then you get into the huge conversations of whether it's possible to be polite and polite, is it polite, moral, or virtuous without being Christian? Oh no, we're opening up the cans of worms for the booger troll to eat.
Ooh. Yeah, and is it possible to be well mannered and impolite?
Well, so this is where I usually end up in our E-Duchy problem. It's like you have people telling you you're being nasty, and then you have other people saying that's not Christian. I actually there's a song by a certain singer whom we enjoy, who's talking about his dad and he going on off against each other. Right? I only listen to Jesus is King right now. That's literally all the music I have. I listen to it on the way to church. I hear mass. I come back. I'm listening to Jesus is King. And in the song where he's going back and forth, when Ye's going back and forth with his dad, of that's not Christ-like. That's not Christ-like. You're not Christ-like. And they're yelling at each other, right? It's like, no, but that's not Christ-like.
No one ever tells you what being Christ-like is.
Right, just like it's not, right? That's not Christ-like. So that's not Christ-like. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Christ got pretty fiery sometimes.
He did. But this is where, so we're in this problem of what counts as Christ. Okay, so again, I'm like, this is actually where I ended up in my class today, because we were talking about the Normans. And when the Normans come into England, basically William the Conqueror is a bastard. That's a technical term. He's called William the Bastard because he's, in fact, I guess, allegedly illegitimate. But he's also a riotous, murderous thug who then founds all these monasteries, like at Battle Abbey, where he defeated Harold Godwinson. Although apparently the Godwinsons everybody's nasty. And then you have this society, I'm talking about our E-Duchies or our castles, building all these castles and then having the monks pray for them and then doing penance. And then are they being Christian? And then, of course, because William the Conqueror brings in Jews to England who had not been living there before, they come with him when he's, reestablishing cities that he's sacked and burned and they rebuilding. And so there's suddenly this whole very complicated social situation of the people who he's conquered, the Norman nobility who are now literally lording it over the local population. Foreigners, I mean, William brings in, the Normans bring in all sorts of foreigners, Flemings, Jews, mainly Flemings and Jews. The Flemings come in as mercenaries, and the Jews come in as merchants. And then who is going to set the proper behavior for this whole society now?
Well, was it might makes right? I mean, was it the conquering aristocracy that decided how the locals would behave?
Well, that you'd think so. In our E-Duchy context, it's like, if we can go in, I mean, since in our E-Duchies we can't actually kill anybody yet.
No.
So it's,
I say disappointingly.
So it is in fact all verbal, right? And therefore performances of language and whether we're nasty or nice, you could, I guess if you're admins in a chat, you could be banning people, and that's virtually murdering them because they can't talk anymore.
Or exile, you know.
Or sending you into exile because you've been rude in court. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Just a little digital exile. I think doxing's probably the equivalent of killing somebody on the internet.
Okay, yeah, and that is that.
I'd say that would be murder, and an e-duchy would be to dox somebody.
But that's like breaking the bounds of the E, so that it's saying doxing them is putting them in danger in this not E world, in this yes. actual world, whereas the E world is, well, the way I always think about it was why I'm enjoying the e-duchy problem and the sort of that it's all we're in this. So I mean, it's oral, so we're in the oral streaming and so forth, but it's because it's electronic and disembodied, discarnate. We're all about the I just got static because my dog went under my chair, and that somehow created static in the room. I don't know what. That we are all, that it's beyond our ability to do anything to people physically. So everything has to happen as if we can't touch each other. And what I just started thinking about, I was watching the Project Veritas video that when what's his name?
The Pfizer one.
Yeah, the Pfizer one. James. I met James many years ago. When he is confronting the man with the video that they've just made, saying, "You just said this." And for the guy in the restaurant, it's like, it's horror, right? I could, you could see the Pfizer guy is not happy, but it's like someone is like leapt out of the screen at him. I think the sort of, how can you be here when I was just talking to this person? He's saying, of course I was lying. I was on a date. Of course I lie. So there's some layers there, but the sort of the horror of having the physical world leap out at you and suddenly be there in your actual space when you've expected all of these things to be simply virtual and visual and verbal. The incarnation is our sub-theme here, you guys realize.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of layers to that. First off, it's like, well, I'm lying, I'm on a date. That's kind of the equivalent of, oh, well, I'm lying, I'm in a chat room. It's an interesting it's an interesting thing because you can't physically remove yourself, or you can't physically remove other people from the e-duchies either. So
right.
You're stuck with people in a way that you wouldn't be normally, because if you're in a room with somebody that you don't like, you just tell them to leave, or you leave. You can't really do that in e-duchies unless you're in charge of it. So this is the problem I was describing last week when I said it's very hard to regulate the norms in that environment, because you're kind of beholden to the autocrats of the e-duchies. The rulers of these chat rooms, they rule the chat. You can't navigate it without the autocrat.
Is that a bad thing?
Well, it depends on the chat room, I suppose. It depends on the autocrat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we get into the comparative, comparing all of these little micro kingdoms and how they operate, and you can kind of see these little mini worlds that are springing up everywhere, and you just think, I don't like that one, I'm leaving.
Well, they very definitely take on the character of the autocrat, right? The Lord. So and the thing is, I'm actually fine with that. I think it's totally appropriate that my chat is different from yours, is different from, well, Owen's, out of which I was kicked for talking about the Trinity. It's different from the conversation that Vox has, is different from the conversations that, I don't know, E. Michael Jones has in his chat. It's like that we talked about this last time. It's actually in a way encouraging and fine that all of these separate little households or communities are developing, and that, I think it's actually utterly appropriate that, they have rules for how you should behave in their room. And if you can't behave in their room, you leave. My way of getting kicked out. So, and the thing is, just like, we wouldn't have society or civility. This is our big borders question, right? It's like, do you just let everybody come in without having some sense of how everyone behaves together in which community you're talking about, right? In the frontier town with Schweringen and his frontier women, or in our frontier chats, where in my Telegram chat, I can get rid of people very easily because I say I have one rule at the beginning, which is salute your opponent. You don't come in courteously into my chat room. I am under no obligation whatsoever to allow you to stay because I told you what the rule was at the outset. Yeah. And that sort of creation of culture, society, it can be endlessly fascinating to realize that we're living through this, right? This emergence of the e-world is happening, as we play, as it were. But then we are coming into it with well, could it exist without norms of behavior, and then what should those be?
Could it exist without norms of behavior? I just instantly thought of 4chan. That's the ultimate internet frontier environment because there are there are kind of norms. There were kind of norms, but anything goes, and you find anything there. So there's a completely unregulated frontier. These ones are different. They disprove the theory that open borders works, definitely. You have to regulate who's coming in and out, but you've mentioned this before as well. We find that if you have the same people in there all the time, they become stagnant and dead. Yep. You need to have new people entering the e-duchy in order to keep it interesting, to keep things moving.
This is true too. Yes. So we have in fact the problem that Adam Smith might recognize. Don't you love how I just brought that in, right? It's like, well, how do we get from e-duchies to Adam Smith? Well, the problem we're having with open borders generically, which I'm very grateful to Vox for saying, is this ideal, not free trade, right? Which we're sort of cascading down the problems of freedom of expression, which, in the e-duchies, that's often, it's like, well, I thought you believed in freedom of speech. It's like, not in my room. Bang. It's like, I told you how I want you to behave here. If you want freedom of speech, go out in that other place. But where is that other place? Yes. And, as we found out in the larger e-world, it certainly doesn't include Facebook. Although I will say my post about, the effects of the medicine that particular gentleman who was accosted by Project Veritas was working with, have now the fact checkers on Facebook have slowed down. That my Facebook posts are getting less rapidly fact checked and labeled. It's I think there's I'm not sure that it was wrong for Facebook to want to do that, but it is a problem. It's like we say, freedom of expression about what, under what circumstances, and then the free trade, right, as Fox has shown, that ends up with not just the movement of goods, right, without tariffs, which I'm just going to bring in all the other guys on our platform, right, which Razorfist was talking about when he's talking about Lincoln, right? It's like the degree to which the North wanted to get money out of those tariffs that they would want to impose on the South. So there's taxes and movements of goods. But then if you take Adam Smith's idea of all of this freedom, right, this free out to its logical limits, you end up with the freedom of labor, right? The labor moves around all over the world, and you end up with no communities whatsoever, because literally it all dies, as we're now experiencing. It's like the nations are pushing back against, ironically enough, the ideas of the enlightened philosopher who who wrote The Wealth of Nations, right? So we're supposed to be getting wealthy as nations, but in fact, what happens if you let everything move around freely in these terms with no borders to anything, allegedly, you have no communities.
No, everything dissolves. Tribes dissolve, families dissolve, because everybody's been turned into an economic unit, which is Australia.
Right, our vending machine, Australia's vending machine is the Adam Smithian version of quote free trade, right? The labor and the trade the industry should move to the place where it's least expensive to make it and everybody benefits. Allegedly.
Yes, until it becomes cheaper to send it somewhere else. Then you end up with the multinational corporation model, which is where you've got companies, you've got an American company that moves its factory to China, and that becomes more expensive, so they move it to Vietnam.
Right.
Then that becomes too expensive, then they'll try and find a poorer country with it. It's just perpetual outsourcing of everything, because the labor's been divorced from the home economy. So it's like the public economic requirements are divorced from the home economy of having family and having children. It's the whole thing is being completely divorced from home economic life. So you can outsource perpetually because it doesn't matter, because it's just labor units getting shifted around, instead of realizing that the economy should be based in the production of materials in a particular location, which creates a culture in the first place. You can't move a steel mill from one country and put it into another country and then retain the same cultures in both places. The technology is going to change the culture. The absence of the technology is going to change the culture there as well. We had this problem in Australia because we had a huge automotive industry. It was like Detroit. We had a lot of car companies that used to operate from Australia. They've ceased operations now. We don't produce automotive stuff, cars, engine parts, that kind of thing. It's all been closed down. The communities around the factories were very working class, like typically labor voting, which is pro-union, old left, pre purple hair and gender pronouns leftists. And
the laboring left.
A lot of the guys.
The laboring left, yes.
Yeah, the laboring left, as opposed to the I don't know what.
Well, the SJW left. No,
word,
so we have this economic idea that we can move all these people around. Apparently, expecting them all to be able to behave. Question. Yeah. Was Adam Smith so stupid that he just assumed this would work?
Yes. I'm gonna vote yes.
Why was he so stupid to think this would simply work? If you could just, we're gonna have the wealth of nations. We're gonna move stuff around. We're gonna have, one country making one thing. Everything can move around very easily, and there's gonna be no breakdown of civilization.
He sounds like the kind of people that designed the education system. So yeah, I would believe it.
Well, I mean, he is, because certainly the American education system was founded on these Scottish enlightened philosophers who all, trotted over to Princeton and then became Presbyterian ministers. so there's Smithian there's Smithian expectations of the way people behave behind a lot of what we are facing now, and this Smithian expectation of the way people behave. I'm certain you've heard the phrase when people say, "Oh, it's just common sense," right? We've talked about this before. It's just common sense that the way everybody's going to behave in a way that society is simply going to work.
Self-assemble,
right?
The
self-assembling society that is simply going to work, and we have Adam Smith and his enlightened philosophy to thank for that. Why on earth did he think this would work? Well, he actually wrote 2 books. One was The Wealth of Nations, which everybody has heard. The other one is, of course, the less read but equally fascinating so-called Theory of Moral Sentiments. Now, one should run screaming from the Theory of Moral Sentiments almost instantaneously. Why should that be? What are sentiments?
Feelings.
Feelings! Why, class?
I'm out. Bye.
Why, class, did Adam Smith think everybody would behave well?
Because his feelings told him they
yes! It's literally, I mean, it's like we're talking about the conservatives are now reeling, you know, in desperation and horror, because realizing, okay, not only did Adam Smith invent, you know, the philosophy that we end up with the free trade so that our communities crumble, he literally also invented the SJWs, who, you know, are motivated by, he's like, Adam Smith is woke. This should be the meme that comes out of this episode and then horrifies people. I actually wrote a little blog post about this back in 2017. It was a long time ago. Why shaming works. And this is it's fascinating because I think I didn't really get it at the time. The post is something about like why Sherlock Holmes and Milo purportedly never feel shame, and I work through it, and it's like, you know, because shaming relies on doubting yourself, and they just never feel doubt, and so they just don't get it, right? But the what I recognize now is more important about what Smith claims is that he is literally basing his entire expectation of people behaving well on your not wanting to be shamed. It's the single most SJW technique we have, right? In Adam Smith's words. Now that you cannot shame me because I actually know the words. Man naturally desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely, or to be that thing which is the natural and proper object of love. He naturally dreads not only to be hated, but to be hateful, or to be that thing which is the natural and proper object of hatred. He desires not only praise, but praiseworthiness, or to be that thing which, though it should be praised by nobody, is, however, the natural and proper object of praise. He dreads not only blame, but blameworthiness, or to be that thing which, though it should be blamed by nobody, is, however, the natural and proper object of blame. So he says, Smith goes on to say, it's not just that he wants to be worthy, to find oneself the object of praise. You want to be worthy of it. Worse than being hated in Smith's account is to know oneself a proper object of hatred. This is shame, the feeling of being less than one knows in one's heart one should be. This is me, right? Not only because one is not loved, but because he or she is not worthy of love. So we want not just to be loved, but to be confident that we are worthy of love, that we are the thing that should be loved, and are loved for our own sake, not just for what we appear. We want to be lovely, right? Shaming works because we doubt whether or not we're actually worthy of love. Yeah.
Excuse me. I'm choking on Adam Smith.
So is this what it means to be Christian, right? To be subject to shame because you're constantly anxious about whether you're worthy of praise, you're worthy of love, to be dreading always to find yourself the object of hatred. I ask you. Ladies and gentlemen,
no.
Is this to be Christian? To be so afraid that someone might talk badly about you that you will no longer be loved? Real now. I'll wait while you get over how this.
No, so I'm choking on Adam Smith.
But
that is so messed up. There are so many implications for how this has been weaponized. Oh Lord, I just think
right now I'm choked up too, but from drinking, which is very rude. I should not be drinking while we're talking. It might horror of horrors remind you I have a body. And how disgusting!
It's just not the
how
it's not the done
disgusting!
thing.
How disgusting to be incarnate! And my throat choked up because I got a little tickle in it from the fizzy water I have. Yeah, no, the thing is, I think when I wrote that 6 years ago, I was like, figuring out how to survive. Like, we started last stream talking about my 3 Cheers for White Men problem, and how I ended up, the opprobrium of academia for making fun of feminists, and then finding Milo out there making fun of feminists by, his little poll on Twitter about cancer and feminism, and rather of cancer than feminism, and realize, it's like the way Adam Smith is describing the effects of shame. It's like you're driven to doubt yourself. You're driven to doubt whether you're lovely, like lovely. And that is the mechanism that, as far as Smith's was concerned, keeps everybody in line. and then I was doomed to realize that Adam Smith basically gave us the SJWs, who thrive, generically on making sure that you're more terrified of having people whispering about you and talking about you in the background, and not responding in friendly fashion to you in public, than you are of being righteous.
Yeah. It seems like a economic model based on narcissistic abuse. I mean, you're going to gaslight an entire economy into operating because everybody's too scared to do the wrong thing, say the wrong thing, be the wrong thing. Makes perfect sense why this is generated. The social justice mob.
The Ouroboros element here is like, the people you carrying around Wealth of Nations, our econ department at the University of Chicago was still like the biggest undergraduate major, and everyone's wanting to live in, I guess, sort of some kind of capitalism, free market capitalism, right? Well, free market capitalism and SJW wokeness are literally the children of the same father. In this enlightened expectation that just, I don't know, the mechanism is going to work. It's so there's a level of horror there. How did we get here? Is this Christian? Is this Christian behavior? Well, clearly we need to.
That's a trick question.
The thing is, it's like, what does Christian behavior even mean? And it's now time to look at our images, right? So, so I've been reading. It's this very interesting book on the British Jesus. I'll show the book. 1850 to 1970 by Meredith Feldman. I highly recommend this if you want to know why we have the images of Jesus that we do. And the thing that she talks about, she's not talking about manners or behaving like a Christian. This is just like how Jesus was represented in Victorian England and into Edwardian England, and it goes through 1970. So she has a postscript where she talks about Life of Brian and a bit on Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth. Things that I did not appreciate. I did not appreciate how strange it was. For example, in the 40s, it's the 40s. All my dates have flown out of my head. In the 1940s, when Dorothy Sayers wrote the script for the radio play, The Man Who Would Be King, that this was the first time the BBC had tried to portray Jesus at all. Right. So it's like the radio Jesus is coming into being. And then by the 1950s, they have to, they're worried about the television Jesus. So they have to, invent him. So that I realized that the shows that I was impressed by from the 70s, like Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar and Jesus of Nazareth, the Zeffirelli one, and then Life of Brian soon after. Like the 1970s was this heyday of these new Jesus narratives. I guess Hollywood had been making all the sword and sandal epics in the 50s, but it's we're sort of suddenly in the electric Jesus
Yeah.
with all of this imagery. And for England, it was very challenging because Jesus had not been portrayed by an actor since the 17th century.
Interesting.
Yeah, that blew my mind.
Why?
Because they thought it was Catholic.
Oh, yes.
Because yes, and
That is
so
cool.
so although I'm sorry, I don't have a tissue and my nose is dripping. This is really bad. How topical. I'm going to have to wipe my nose. There I go. How gross.
Don't use the tablecloth.
What?
Don't use the tablecloth.
I don't have. Well, I'm covered in doggy trousers and stuff that I wear to the park, so I guess that's okay. Think about my nose starts dripping when I'm talking about not portraying the incarnate God on the stage. Sniff, snort, right? Yeah. Okay. So there had been a theater act that forbid the portrayal of Jesus on stage from the 17th century. So we think of English drama, the great English drama, right? Shakespeare and stuff. They're never portraying Jesus until Dorothy Sayers did this radio play script. And then in the 50s, they have a television show on the BBC with Tom Fleming. I haven't watched this one, portraying Jesus. And he's sort of it's a more standard classical actor. So he goes all King James Version on them. But because the Protestants were so anxious about not falling into Catholicism, that was one of the things. That there were complaints about Sayers' radio version of Jesus, that it's this lady novelist doing the Roman Catholic Oberammergau, the great passion play in Germany. Mm-hmm. Could find that it's a good
So they're terrified of converting by accident to Catholic behavior.
Yes. That they don't. I loved Sayers' play. I didn't realize it's like horribly Anglican, but that they worried about. Yeah, for example, letters. The BBC got letters all the time. We think this dramatization of the New Testament is dreadful. This impersonation of Christ and Mary in modern voices, apart from being ridiculous, it is wrong and gives an incorrect impression and removes the awe and majesty due to Christ. They were constant. It's interesting that the more they tried to portray the incarnate Christ, the more people got upset. So that we end up on the other side with the life of Brian. Is kind of like it's a straight trajectory there. And what the problem being for the English is, by the time the Pythons did Life of Brian, nobody cared. Right? It was at least according to Feldman in her account, that they tried so hard to represent a historically accurate Jesus, they ended up with no God.
So they'd stripped all the spirituality out of the gospel, trying to make it so historically accurate.
Yes and no. So sort of, right? It's like, and that's, you think, okay, it's just simple that they want to, they're worried about making him historically accurate. And we used some pictures from some of that last week with particularly Tissot's representations of the New Testament. That's going to get more complicated, but one of it's like they didn't know how to portray Jesus, and they kept wanting to make sure that he is both human, but not Roman Catholic, but awe-inspiring and majestic, but not like too silly or mystical or something. So the picture I'm showing now is one of these. If you're up in the 1950s in England, you would see this kind of Jesus in your children's Bible, right? Or they all end up in the children's book. So you have Jesus. He actually, what I find funny about this one is it's considered one of the sort of more feminized representations of Jesus. So he's sort of looking gently over his shoulder and he's holding a lamb and stuff, but he's got the beard of that and the jaw of that Chad guy. in the gifts.
The Chad meme guy.
The Chad meme guy. So, but interestingly, this Chad meme guy, long-haired, bearded Jesus is also a little wispy, right, in his affect, because he's sort of gently cradling the little lamb. And that there's no, it gets funnier because there was a whole series of paintings done by this Harold Copping. I think that I've got his name right. And the one showing now is Jesus with Mary and Martha, and you can see the effects of the sort of they want it all to be accurate, but they want it to be sort of awe-inspired and majestic, and they want it to be not Catholic, but it's like they're in this terrible conflict in the public conversation about what, and they're also, Feldman is very good about this. She's also talking about the way in which the Victorian New Testament scholars themselves are desperately fighting off the German Protestant liberal version of Jesus, which has a variety of registers, whether or not they think they can find Jesus in the New Testament as a historical character, or whether the New Testament is all mythology, or whether it's like nobody knows where to look. And never mind, what would Jesus do? They're like vexed with how to, and I think with our conversations, I realized some of this is all happening in the midst of the great media transformation that obviously we're also meditating on. It all begins around 1860. So it fits with the big media transformation. It plays out in these paintings, these books, these reproduce the pictures, the famous pictures, the Tissot pictures will turn into slideshows, right? They'll have lantern slides, so you can go to your Sunday school or your church and have lectures with slides like we do here. And then the radio plays, and then the television, and there's this incredible anxiety about what do you do once you're trying to portray Jesus, not in pictures or with an actor making believe that he is portraying our Lord.
Well, it's interesting because all of the uses of those images, they're doing everything with them but using them in a liturgical setting.
Yes.
Which is what the icons were used and are used as. They're liturgical media.
Yeah.
They're not illustrative in the sense that you've just got some pictures for the slideshow, or you've got some pictures to put in the children's books, or so that seems to be an interesting problem that they have there. So they're not using them as liturgical media. They get this incredible anxiety about whether or not they're doing it right. constantly, and then the next level is, of course, this is the Britain of the Empire, and there's several of these pictures. Veldman says that like everybody would have known them, everybody would have seen them, and the one that she uses on the cover of her book is the one I'm showing now, and it's Jesus with children. Right, so we're moving into this problem of they're all anxious about how to educate the children in Christianity, and realizing the children don't know the stories, but then they get very anxious about scaring the children with stories like, I don't know, the crucifixion, but the scaring children with the Old Testament stories. So there's a persistent refrain of, you can't make Jesus, you need to make Jesus friendly so that the children want to be with him, but you can't make him too there's no way it's like, as you're saying, there's no liturgical place for this, although this is happening, presumably churches. And then because it's the empire, they're also now convicted on, like, how if you're portraying Jesus incarnate, do you portray him, right? Do you we said he looks like a Chad. In this one, I mean, there's obviously a lot of complaint about this, because he's trying to be shown as, embracing children of the whole world. So we have children from all continents, therefore Chinese and Indian and African and
I guess Pacific Ocean, and then there's a
Brad Pitt, Jesus.
And then there's a little white girl on the side, and of course there's massive complaints about this because all of the children are looking at Jesus except for the little white girl who is the same color as Jesus, and now we're in that level of if you're trying to portray him physically, historically accurately, then you have to deal with, oh gosh, race. Because this is of course the period when the British are in control of all of these regions, sort of. I guess China's dealing with the Opium War and such, and the empire is trying to represent itself as Christian, and what does that mean?
Christ-like,
right? Where are we going to go with Christ-like on all of this? And then they do have one very, very famous picture, which is this Jesus at the doorway, Holman Hunt's Light of the World, which is so contentious it goes through like 3 different versions. I think this is the version in Canterbury. Where is that one now? It's the one in. Sorry, I've forgotten. It's the last one. It's the one on public display. There's one in Keble College where you can't see, and there's another one that he made that blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and this one apparently is, if you asked Protestants by the late 19th century what Jesus looked like, it would be with this picture. Do you remember it? I showed it to you.
Yeah, I think I do.
It's Jesus knocking at a door. He's all illuminated. He's holding this lantern.
Oh, yes, that one.
He's got a kind of liturgical cope on and a halo, and it's all very allegorical. I mean, Holman Hunt was trying. I mean, what's funny is he's trying to find a Protestant Jesus, and when he first did this painting, everybody hated it because they said it was too Catholic, or they said it was too mystical, or they said it was too weird. By the end of the century, it's like talking about our. If you're too far ahead of the curve, you just wait 30 years and people catch up eventually. By the end of the century, everybody had a copy of this painting. It was, if you had they'd made prints of it, they'd sold, copies that workers would have in their cottages and stuff. And here now is, I guess, the Jesus that we're going to try to be like, which is this kind of, Chat who's watching, right? Silent Draco is saying, no savior, only sentiment remained. Kind of yes, right? One of the interesting responses to what happens with Holman Hunt's painting is people looked at Jesus's face in this and they said they're constantly worried about Jesus being represented as too feminine. Hunt actually did use women as some of his models for this image. Right, he had it's like a composite image. It's a sort of blended face, and people were picking up on the fact that he has Rossetti as one of his models. So there's this blending of features on his face, and the other effect was that Jesus Forever After in English representations is going to be, as Feldman keeps saying, in a white nightie. Jesus in his white nightgown, right? Thanks to Holman Hunt painting him as he's trying to show him as the light, right? The light that bursts into the world, the light that comes to the door of the heart and knocks on it and wants to be let in and stuff. And weirdly enough, what you end up with is Jesus Forever After in English imagination is. Oh well, I put the pictures in the wrong order.
I was going to say there are not many steps before you arrive at the Mormon Jesus from that image.
I suppose, right? I'll go back to that. Yes, it's Jesus in the white nightie is the problem that at least in the English Protestant world we seem to be faced with. It's like the only one we can see, and every single time they make a television program or a movie, even Life of Brian, I'll get to that one in a second. In the English media. And it feeds over into the American media too. It ends up with, for the Protestants, he has to have this kind of ethereal character that's also incarnate, that's also not racial, that is masculine, that is feminine. We're my next picture is our singer,
That all sounds very, very inclusive. And very like inclusivity neurosis.
Yes, the inclusivity neurosis is already playing out in the English representation of Jesus over and over and over again, right? Here's Ye holding his Bible again, squinting at it. This is becoming iconic for us, right? I like this particular shot of Ye holding the Bible, squinting at it, saying, "What do we see through this?" Right? What do we see through this? It is the icon for English speakers of we're constantly holding the book, saying that we should be able to look at the book and see through the book to what?
The word.
The word.
Yeah. Everybody wants to see the word in the word. But the trouble is you can't see the word in the word without the church.
Well, I mean,
a few reasons.
Ironically, we ended up all perpetually offended, right? Which is the okay, it's like there's a visionary. My slides are not perfect tonight. I am failing on so many levels. I'm so ashamed. I'm so embarrassed. Okay, go to the next one. Shame. No,
everyone's gonna Adam Smith you now.
Well, I want to be considered, you know, the brilliant professor who has all her slides in the right order and that there was some sound in the background that just distracted me, and now I'm cold and it's like, no, forget it. I will not risk offending the left. The left is already offended, whether you would risk it or not. I mean, we get there constantly, right? It's like I'm not gonna. I go back to looking at Jesus, right? I'm not going to say this thing that offends anybody because I'm desperately worried about, we'll go back in time, back through Ye, to Holman Hunt, to Jesus with the children of the world. Like, it seems like we're in nothing but Smithian shame wars.
Yes.
Over who Jesus should be, whether we should, believe in him, whether we should talk about him, how can we talk about him? It's exhausting.
It is. Interesting. Okay, so I'm thinking the imagery that the English have divorced from the liturgical practice of the Catholic Church has become a battleground over hurt feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Really. Which is the Smithian problem of the sentiments of morality, right? So it's like an empire running on sentiments. But this is interesting because that's not historical either. So they're looking at Christ through their own sentiment.
Yes, very much so.
And which is interesting because they're going to impose themselves on the icons that they're creating. They're writing themselves into this icon.
Yes, constantly. And the what would Jesus do question becomes, I mean, I was thinking about this as a...
It's like AI. It's like this created AI Jesus. Like, this is what you... So like this English Christ, anti-Catholic, that is in white robe is like the English Protestant AI Jesus. This is like the version of Christ that they've created, just like AI imagery. It's like AI art, only it's like Adam Smith world creates Christ.
Mind blown.
That's the image that comes into my head as you've described all of this, and I go, oh, that explains why I hated not Christ, but I just couldn't stand the vibe of Christianity, like the organized churches. And when I went through my super Protestant phase where I was like, it's all horrible. because it was all very Anglican. So that explains it.
Well, you would have gotten all of this kind of thing. This is what Feldman shows in her book, that these are the images that then show up in all the Sunday school teaching, all the lantern slide lectures,
Yeah.
all of the prints, right? They're making prints to make this, like the Holman Hunt I have back on screen, is out there. Everybody knows it. It becomes iconic in the reproduction sense, that it's mechanically reproduced. The Walter Benjamin thing.
It's the Gutenberg version of an icon. You just keep going bang 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 bang. So why is everyone worried about AI art when we've already been doing it with Christ for like how many hundreds of years?
Well, the photography.
I mean this isn't handwritten.
Go ahead.
But it's not a handwritten icon. We're mass reproducing this Smithian vision of Christianity, or Smithian vision of Christ. We've already been doing it.
I'm glad you're saying. I've been thinking that too with the AI stuff, because the more it's participating in this reproduction that's discarnate, right? That on the one hand, they're worrying about how to portray Jesus without losing the awe and the majesty, but on the other, they want there's this British empiricism that it plays out in all of it, that they desperately want to make sure that he is historically accurate in his representations, so that then they go back and forth about whether or not he should look Jewish, and what Jewish means to them, to the British in the 19th century, is we went to Palestine, took photographs of all of the locations and people there, brought back samples of costumes and such, and painted that. Right? Holman Hunt also does it does another. I didn't put these in the slides. Fail. A number of other images that are likewise sort of typological and symbolic, but he went to the Holy Land, to Palestine. I'm not sure they think of it as the Holy Land. They think of it Palestine. He goes to Palestine to take photographs of like the Dead Sea, so you can do the scapegoat picture there. He does the Jesus as carpenter, and he does his model as a man that he sees there. So they're doing all of this for hyper realistic representation, because British scholarship feels like the best way to prove the reality of Jesus, interestingly, as the Christ, is to do this hyper historical truth that their scholarship enables them to do. Or it doesn't. I mean, they keep convincing themselves that it didn't work quite, or it did. Or the book taught me a lot about the problem of sentimentality and the empirical tradition, and so the problem, therefore, what happens when you're trying to imagine Jesus through these new media that we're dealing with.
So I was laughing because you've described this weird schizophrenia. It's a British schizophrenia, hyper empirical. They need to measure everything, and yeah, they're addicted to sentiment, and they think they're rational when actually they're in their feels. It's very funny. So they're putting this onto the faith and saying, no, we've measured it. Here's the proof. It looks real because it looks like the place that we visited and took photos of. Discarding I'm sorry, my brain's hurting. Discarding 2,000 years of iconography inside the apostolic churches that are practicing liturgies with these icons, living media of worship of Christ. That's got to go, but we'll go to Palestine and take some photographs, and then that will be the most accurate. That's how do people not see how like the world didn't enjoy being colonized by England? I'm like,
Well, to be fair to it took me a while to get it. I mean, it's like, but the English we bring we bring all this great stuff like the English language. I still like the English language, and we're still using it in our poetry. But it's the going back to my Norman England problem, right? That the Normans, who couldn't like the Normans in the long run? They bring you all of this good government. The Doomsday book. I mean, it's literally from the beginning. In my medieval England class, we're reading Michael Wood's In Search of England. I may have mentioned that in previous streams. New people welcome. That we're reading Michael Wood's In Search of England, and one of the essays he starts with is it's the Norman yoke, right? Whether or not the Normans were in fact the evil oppressors, or whether they were they brought administration and law and good order and such to the Saxons, who have none of it. And I tend to be on the Anglo-Saxon sides, but the hilarity of that is, of course, the Anglo-Saxons were both conquerors and conquered constantly too. So there's not easy good guys on any of these sides, but the imperial claim for England has always been, we're the ones that bring law. We've got the good law, right? And that'll be the way that they talk about India with Sati, like we talked about last time. And just generically if you're colonized by England, you're going to have this social structure brought to you, and it will be more, I guess, industrially efficient. And that claim goes back in some fashion to the claim that the Normans brought good governance too.
So this is absorbed into that. This Norman good governance is absorbed into the machinery of England somehow.
Well, here's an irony. You'll like this. The way that England becomes England, as opposed to a variety of kingdoms, Northumbria, Wessex, Kent, Mercia, and stuff, you realize it's only actually like identifiable as this place called England that someone can be king of in sort of stable terms after it's conquered by Canute the Dane. And you could say the Norman, and then the Normans come along a generation later, that the Normans conquer England, becomes basically a province of their mini empire, right, of Normandy. And so England itself is the creation of being conquered, if that makes sense.
It does.
But prior to that, it has much more local identifications and rulers. And then once it's conquered and absorbed into this big administrative structure, it's true. Then the Normans are, in fact, they create England in that sense, because they create it as a region that you can survey, put in the book, Doomsday Book, and say, this is its productive capacity, which is what William does.
So it's gained its identity by incorporation into a bureaucracy.
Yep.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've got I'm going to recap. So we've got a bureaucratic machine, country, and it incorporates this place, gains an identity by being incorporated into bureaucracy, and then cut forward, they completely get rid of Catholicism. And then they decide to use the economic theory of this guy who was in his fields completely, and decided that you could just trust everyone would know the right way to behave.
The short version, I suppose, is that, yeah. I mean,
I have to create like a little snippet just because this is how I find the ridiculousness in these things. It's like, okay, that all sounds really good, but now we get to the problem of the whole world being run on bureaucracy.
Yes, and feels.
Bureaucracy and feels. So that makes sense. That explains the world we're living in now. Feelings and bureaucracy and AI English Jesus. that now we're just getting rid of completely, because it's like the sentimentality is even like disappearing. You know, the need to sort of say we're a Christ-like empire, we're Christian.
Well, but it does show why in the English context it's so hard to answer that question, right? Christ-like is, I mean, and the English wrestled with this, as Feldman shows, you know, throughout the Victorian period into the 20th century, with is Christ-like masculine? Is it feminine? Can you be masculine? They have big debates over, you know, like, how can you portray him masculine in a masculine fashion, but then, oh, you don't want to be scary to the kids, and so they flip back and forth in their efforts. I mean, never go. I mean, and she purposefully in her book didn't deal with the Catholic representations of Christ. I mean, I had this is blown. I've talked about, you know, I don't know where to go now, right? Because I had always thought, you know, Lewis and Tolkien. I mean, all of us Americans looking back, oh, look, Lewis and Tolkien, they're there. They've, you know, got this strong, you know, Christianity. You've got Lewis is doing his Mere Christianity lectures on the radio around the same time that Sayers did that radio play, right? So the BBC is doing all of this religious broadcasting in the 40s, and that's where those both Mere Christianity and Sayers play come out of that effort to educate England in being Christian, because as far as everybody's concerned, nobody is, right? So ironically, you know, Lewis and his great lectures that many people enjoy now was preaching in a context in which they were really worried, how would you educate the nation as Christians? And then Tolkien writing his great stories, and, you know, has brought so many people to Catholicism. They're doing it in a bit of a desert of culture. Although, you know, it's like everybody's reading these Bibles, these illustrated kids' Bibles and stuff, and the children are all going to Sunday school and apparently enjoying it, but nobody seems to know what Christianity is.
Yeah, they're not preaching to the choir, they're preaching to the bureaucracy. Bureaucracies don't need religion.
Well, they do need...
They need administration, and they need measurement. They need social norms, but they don't need religion. Because you're not seeking mystical experience within the bureaucracy.
Right. Yes.
In fact, that would be bad for the bureaucracy.
Well, they
will hurt the status quo.
They seem to worry in some of the discussions, like when they start doing the radio plays and such, it's whether or not he sounds right, or should he sound Bible. Sayers' play is very... I mean, she's a great writer, so she gets a kind of nice balance between sounding King James version, but it's the King James version. It's a bureaucratic Bible. The king has said this is the version of the Bible that the English will use back in 1611. And if you're reading the King James Bible, you're already reading this bureaucratic production of the scripture. And then by the 20th century, they're worrying about sounding scripture, but also being historically incarnate, which they then get upset about. And we're back in the cycle of, you know, you offend everybody. But it's just I will not risk offending the left. It's like, I mean, it is interesting.
Put the right in there too. Go on.
Well, it's like everybody's talking about Jesus is perpetually offended in anyway. And so my own little meme is the how it started, how it's going. And how it started is with Holman Hunt trying to do this Light of the World, which I don't like it as a painting. It's interesting, but I don't like it for the wrong, you know, the reasons that, I mean, I like that it's sort of typological and he's knocking at the door and there's scripture verses on it, and it's somehow trying to represent Christ as priest a little bit because he's got the vestments on and such. But I dislike it for the reasons that I guess other people, I don't know, whatever. But it started with Hunt and it ended up with their Life of Brian. You know, we ended up with the Monty Python troupe making this parody that doesn't actually directly parody Jesus, but is basically where people were with, well, if we want to make this historically accurate version, isn't it actually a commentary on our own social difficulties, or about making jokes about Romane ite domum, right? The Latin lesson. Yeah. And that, you know, implicitly that Jesus was just this ordinary guy every day, right, that bumbled into getting crucified. Silent Draco says, English Christianity, clean, orderly, punctual. Station master Jesus. Yes. Keeps the railroad Jesus. Measured out so Auntie Petunia will buy copies for all the kiddies. Yes, very much so. So it's weird because it's like, they're trying to bring Christian education to the kiddies, but on the other hand, incapable of having a Jesus that does anything that might...
childlike.
Yeah. So we're kind of in a conundrum right now. It's like if everybody's worried, if the contest that Ye is having with his dad is within this English speaking context, it's like, what's Christ like? What's Christ like? You're not Christ like. You're not nice.
Oh yeah. Nice. Not be good, be nice.
But it is typically, I mean, it's polite, it's nice, it's you can have some more wine now.
Oh man, you're making me want to drink. I feel like I'm in England. I've never even been there.
I have, and tea is very nice there. My English husband and I, have it imported specially by Tetley's. The drug of choice of the empire, tea and sugar.
Oh yeah, yeah, Tetley's. We got Lipton. We don't. Tetley's is around for a while.
Lipton's a little bit bitter. I always see the English cannot stay on topic.
Yeah.
We end up being about how to be polite and neighborly.
Well, that goes against the problem with. See, now that's interesting. Okay, so we start out talking about e-duchies and the etiquette in the e-duchies. Now we're on English politeness and the niceties of the English-speaking world. But the internet's not really, how shall I say, functioning in an English way. At least the internet that I'm in, or the e-duchies that I enjoy. I mean, I told everyone I'm quite nasty sometimes.
Right. But I think this fun. Is the
I'm not nice though, and I have not enjoyed the actually nasty is probably the wrong word. But the nice e-duchies I don't like.
the white Jesus in the white 90 duchies. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. White nighty Christ like I don't enjoy that. Our poor Mormon friend. I gave him so much. So I don't like that. So now this is interesting. This is okay. So we've got the English world imposing a bureaucratic mentality on their AI white nighty Jesus. What are we doing with our e-duchies? Really, this is the autocrats of the e-duchies are making them in their own image, and I'm thinking, this is beginning to make a lot of sense to me now, especially with regards to our chats, because we get into so much trouble when everyone says, "Oh, I thought this was a Christian chat." You say, "Yeah, it is." They say, "Oh, why are you behaving like this? Why are you using these words? Why are you posting this? What are you doing?" I'm having fun. But you shouldn't be doing this. This isn't Christ-like. So I don't like bureaucratic environments.
I clearly,
I don't like the bureaucratic
but the thing is, I think there's also something. It's saying there's something missing from our sense. We do need to know how to behave and like there's disarticulation. There's a sort of, this is kind of part one, setting out in tonight's episode, the problem that we're wrestling with. We are moving to a part 2, which suggests a sort of another layer of the problem, I think, which may or may not be an answer. You guys, this is going to be multi-episode. It's like, this is a mini series, just like the Jesus of Nazareth that is actually, I'm sorry to say, the Jesus of Nazareth, Zeffirelli one, it was only 2 episodes, right? Or it was,
no, it was more than 2.
Maybe it was 4.
I'm sure it was. Yeah, it was like little parts, like acts.
Yeah. So now we're in the streaming world. We're making mini series about Jesus. Perfect. But also that I'm happy where we've gotten to now, realizing this, how to behave like Christians. It is, I mean, what? Okay, it's fundamentally a question. It's the good part of, if we're talking about how to be, the beautiful in our poetry and the truth and the logos and the understanding, but we do need to know how to behave, and it's incredibly difficult to unpack, because everybody, it's like, and saying why don't open borders work? People have, and this is not quite where I wanted to go, but just think about it. Why don't open borders work in the Adam Smithian way? Well, one, everybody's not going to behave the same way. They're not going to, and what culture is these expectations of behavior, and saying whether or not you're Christian is often saying, why aren't you behaving with the manners that I expect from polite interaction? So you're making me uncomfortable, failure of sentiment, because you are either saying things that I find difficult to hear or being nasty. And we're not really very good even in the E-world, or even in our thinking, of disentangling all of those different reactions. It's just like, you made me feel uncomfortable and sad, and you shouldn't behave that way. I'm going to shame you.
I'm spurging now. I have to check the etymology of nasty. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's good. I know I'm breaking internet etiquette because I'm not looking at the camera or you. Okay. Oh, I like this
Sometimes I read, so that's okay.
No, but I was really spurging because I hate using the wrong word. Nasty, late 14th century, nasty, foul, filthy, dirty, unclean, literally or figuratively a word of uncertain origin. Something about Old Norse from Naskog, dirty or nasty. Yeah, actually, I'll use that.
I see how important it is.
Nasty.
Precision in our language. This is the poetic impulse. We must speak. We must speak well in order to speak accurately.
I don't like nice because I read years ago that nice actually comes from the Latin, which means ignorant. It's connected to the word for ignorance in Latin, apparently. So I never liked being called nice, because I always thought it was a passive-aggressive way of saying that I was ignorant.
It's different. It has real force in England. Saying that's nice in England is a horrible insult. So it's like there's a kind of, actually I saw this. There was a parallel meme thing. Maybe I can find it. I will now look at my thing, because I think
do it. Let's spurg.
We're spurging out and misbehaving on the internet. Oh, look, I found. Okay, so because I sent it to my husband and I just found it in our messages.
Shameless spurging is the key to fixing this culture.
Yes, maybe this is it. Now, we are going to shamelessly spurg and trace all of these lineages. What the British say compared with what the British mean, what foreigners understand, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what the British say, I hear what you say. What the British mean, I disagree and do not want to discuss it further. What foreigners understand, he accepts my point of view. What the British say, with the greatest respect. What the British mean, you're an idiot. What foreigners understand, he is listening to me. So there's all of this. That's not bad. That's good. That's poor. Not bad. It's like, that is what the British say. That is a very brave proposal. What the British mean, you're insane. What foreigners understand, he thinks I have courage. So it's like we make jokes about this, right? And of course, Monty Python was brilliant at playing off of this anxiety, always, of they are, you're terrified of being embarrassed, being shamed. So you've developed these locutions, and I know how these work. One, because as I said many times now, my husband is British. I've lived in both England and Wales. But I think also in the kind of American folkways expectations, a lot of this still is recognizably Southern to me, right? Bless your heart.
Oh yeah,
it's like it's like we're straight up old world politeness, while you are, got the knives out destroying someone's reputation without actually being mean or something, right? I mean, everybody knows on the internet now, it's like if a Southerner saying "bless your heart," aren't you a stupid person for thinking?
Is that worse or better than "I'll pray for you"?
I think "I'll pray for you" can be used innocently, right? I think people really do mean it when they say that. It's like, no, I think "I'll pray for you" is not meant. People hear "I'll pray for you" as you're hopeless, but I don't think that's necessarily what it means. I think that their nuance matters a lot, right? Whereas "bless your heart" is specifically meant to say, gosh, you're stupid, and I'm not going to call you on it. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard.
So just say dumb.
Bless your heart. I mean, all right. So, it's like the see, we need more courtesy in the internet world, because one, it's more fun than the low tier level of insult that people tend to be using. And obviously, if you're around Brits enough, right, they're going to be saying what the British say. Very interesting. What the British mean. That is clearly nonsense. What foreigners understand, they are impressed. This is what the British say. I'm sure it's my fault. What the British mean, it's your fault. What foreigners understand, why did they think it was their fault? We're gonna have to have part 3 on this episode, because we're
baffled by British manners.
Yeah, well, no, we're just
by
dying of the Jesus and the White Knight is in fact completely accurately portrayed.
You Adam Smith to death.
But I'd say the Southern Americans get it somewhat, because the Presbyterian Adam Smithian ministers carried it into my world, right? It's that we're Presbyterian, but we're Southern Presbyterian, and therefore we do know how to like avoid at absolutely all costs being embarrassed, having failing in your social performance, not being a good hostess, all of that, right? It's like they're exquisite rules that are slightly different from the British, so they get upset with us, maybe. Could be. But as finely tuned as the British expectations. Yeah.
I have to make comparisons, although it's difficult, because I grew up in migrant communities, so I think I'm socially retarded. In many ways, I think I am. Because I had to adjust to different rules all the time. And the people that I grew up with didn't have those same kind of passive-aggressive ways of communicating. They were blunt. I'm not really sure if that's because all Greeks are blunt, but those particular generations of Greeks were blunt because they had to be, because they were dealing with second language acquisition and trying not to assimilate into Anglo culture as well. Like, they really did not want to become Anglos. They had Greek schools. Kids went to learn Greek at Greek schools after they'd been to Greek schools, like it was then there wasn't a lot of English around at the time. So yeah, maybe that's contributed to it. But yeah, I'm used to more forceful and honest appraisals of people's behavior and instant feedback for that.
Well, so you would take Inigo Montoya's technique as approved.
Oh yeah, that's the best. I posted that. I had to. I found it, and I was like,
this is beautiful. So the basic level of networking, right? Networking 101. We say Inigo's Guide to Networking Success, and of course we use the approved phrase. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. And it, being that he's Spanish, right? He has great courtesy, and he has everything appropriately marked for you. So first, polite greeting. Hello. Give your name. My name is Inigo Montoya. Relevant personal link. So establish some kind of relationship. You killed my father. Okay. Manage expectations.
That's the best.
Prepare to die. Right.
It's not going to get better for you. It's brilliant. And he's very lovable. See, you don't shame that. That's very lovable. He's very straightforward.
He's also Spanish,
man, too.
If he's Spanish, he's probably also Catholic. Oh, though we're not really going with that because it's this fairy tale version of something or other that's.
Yeah, but he's still Catholic.
He's still got to be Catholic,
right? He's got to be Catholic.
Well, are we going to be saved by Catholicism? This is our part 2 of tonight's. Exercise.
Well, my thought on that exercise. Everybody's gonna spurg because they'll be like, "You're proposing we're gonna get saved by another ism." So it sounds like we're proposing yet another football team or an ideological solution to everything,
Fair.
Which we are not, because this is the chattering that I can already hear erupt amongst the Protestant e-duchies. But it's not an ism that we're proposing as much as it is a return to iconography within a liturgical context, which is, to me, Catholic, which has a flow-on effect in how we deal with the rest of life, just like people programming AI,
Yes, but alas, we've got a few more steps to get to before we get to that.
I spurg. No, I did an Inigo Montoya. Sorry.
No, but the thing is, so personally that I'm delighted that you know that about the liturgy and that we're trying to get people there. But I think that there's to be fair on our other side. Now we've spent an hour and some time making fun of Protestants, or at least the Anglican version of them. Yes. Do we have not a sort of corresponding difficulty in the Catholic context of what it means to behave like Christians, or sort of where are we getting these norms of behavior? And I did a little bit of research. So Tiso, I was like, what would Jesus do? Right, here's the view from the cross, and if we're going to get to that liturgical place, maybe we have to get there. But if we can go into a different version of looking at Jesus's behavior, where would we go? And I did this after teaching you all how to blow your nose last week. Got curious about where that came from, because it's Jean-Baptiste Lassalle's.
Excuse me, I just burped.
I know. Bad. It's like I've been burping and giggling, and we're so rude. We would never pass the rules of good behavior of Christian civility promulgated by that great teacher of children. Here he is in a 1910 foundation, Saint Jean-Baptiste de Lassalle. Now, when I was last week reading his very long passage on how to blow your nose, in great detail. And, if you're children, you need to learn these details. Did not appreciate that, one, it was written by a saint. So there you go. And two, it's written by a very interesting saint who founded schools for children. So this guy should be right up there with our absolute heroes in the Christian world, because he was in fact born an aristocrat, but is recognized as a saint because of his many gifts that he gave to Christianity. One was the Institute of the Brothers of the Christian Schools. It's a massive worldwide order of Christian lay education. So going back to our earlier picture with Jesus surrounded by the children of the world, Salle actually did it. He didn't just paint a picture and envision himself as teaching all the children of the world. The Salle order has schools, and if you look up on the Wikipedia entry, it's very impressive. They're all over Africa, they're all over Asia, they're all over oh yes, even the United States. And there's one in Chicago, and I got down the rabbit hole on this one. Got it. Our mayors before they were Lori Lightfoot, right? The Dailies apparently all went to this school because it's a Catholic school. Yes, so maybe there's hope. Maybe there's actually hope for finding a Christian civilization. Interestingly, well, it's curious, right? His rules were first published in 1703. The one I was showing you is a 1708 printing, but you can find the full French version on Wikipedia, on Google Books. I was looking at I've got an English translation that was more recently made by Brothers of the Institute, right? The Lasallian sources. So here is a when was it given? It's translated from the 1703 edition, 1990, right? This little handbook on Christian behavior, how to be, what do they translate it as? The rules of Christian decorum and civility. So it's not sentiment, it's actually civility. So we want to be civilized, we're going to live by these rules. Went through 45 editions through 1875. It sort of became the handbook of how to behave like a Christian for Catholics in the same period in which we were talking about the problem with the white 90 Jesus developing in Victorian England, right? So we're looking at exact contemporaries.
So it's the same feeling across the denominational chasm. It seems like everybody has the same anxiety.
Yeah. Like civilized behavior, and that's why it was in Norbert Elias's book, because it's like climax of these etiquette handbooks, and then you have it's published in 1703, reprinted throughout the 17th, the 18th, and 19th centuries, still potentially, I guess, used. I mean, this translation I've got was it's Lasallian publication, sponsored by the Regional Conference of Christian Brothers of the United States of America in Toronto, Canada. The editorial board is all brothers. Translators were brother. I'm assuming that means they're teachers in these schools, right? Lasallian publication, sponsored by the Regional Conference of Christian Brothers of the United States of America and of Toronto, Canada. Lasallian publications will produce volumes on the life, writings, and work of Jean-Baptiste de Lassalle, founder of the Brothers of the Christian Schools, and on the early history of the Brothers. So it is actually, just like the English were worried in the 19th century about how to teach children to behave like Christians. We have the Lasallian Christian Brothers trying to set up all these schools, and to say that these, I find it embarrassing, right? Because I'm a new Catholic. I'm not necessarily grown up in all these schools. That our concentration is often on the Jesuits as the great schoolmasters of Catholicism, but they're teaching mainly at the university level, in my imagination. I mean, I know all these Jesuit universities, right? Loyola in Chicago, or Loyola everywhere, right? That those are universities, whereas these schools, like the LaSalle school here, is a high school. So people are going to presumably learn how to behave like Christians in these schools.
presumably.
Well, and then you're saying how much, how do we behave like Christians? Can we disarticulate this? Remember, we're making fun of Adam Smith Morning about being shamed all the time, right? If you're shamed,
Yeah.
then you're not lovely, and then you're just shamed, right? He doesn't set it up as, he sets it up as a theory of moral sentiments, and that morality dissociated from religion necessarily.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a whole completely different catastrophe.
Mel says, Saint Jean Baptiste, pray for us. Yes. Well, okay. So what I've not grown up with this handbook, but I skimmed through it. I know how to blow my nose now, which I didn't do because I didn't have it didn't keep my handkerchief. What I realized in looking through the translation was it's not really Christian for the most part, or it's worrying about things that I think this is, we're in this problem of like daily behavior with each other in our e-duchy context, or in our, like, what does it mean to be Christ-like? What does it mean to behave? And the rules of Christian decorum and civility begin with part 1, the modesty you must show in your deportment and in the care of the various parts of your body. Which is why we had the blowing your nose section, right? It's like, deportment and care of your head, ears, hair, face, forehead, eyebrows, and cheeks, eyes and glances, the nose and the manner of blowing your nose and sneezing, the mouth, lips, and teeth, speech and pronunciation, yawning, spitting, and coughing, the back, shoulders, arms, and elbows, hands, fingers, and nails, the parts of the body that must be covered, the knees, legs, and feet. All of these deportment, right, actually physically, I mean, there's an incarnate element beautifully to it, but it's yeah, I mean, so very specifically, I don't know, what did I was more interested in part 2, which I'll tell you about in a second, right? But yeah, if you wish to have a distinguished appearance and to be esteemed because of the modesty that marks you as a wise and well-behaved person. Remember, this is for boys in school. You must learn to control your body in the way prescribed by nature or by custom. You must avoid, for this reason, several defects in the way you carry yourself. The first of these defects, which is an affectation and a constraint, makes you appear awkward. This is entirely opposed to decorum and to the norms of modesty. You must also avoid the kind of negligent attitude that betrays slovenliness and indolence in your conduct, and that would expose you to contempt because it indicates a meanness of spirit, as well as low birth and poor education. You ought also to be very careful not to let anything flighty appear in your bearing, for this might indicate you are frivolous. If your mind is naturally flighty and heedless, and if you wish to avoid falling into this defect or to correct yourself of it, you must pay attention not to move a single part of your body without attention to what you're doing, and to move only with due restraint.
I'm out.
Well, I realize I've been flailing around in this episode a lot. I'm clearly, it's like, this makes me not Christian. If your temperament is fiery and hasty, you must watch over yourself carefully. Never act without great moderation. Always think before doing anything, and keep your body as much as possible tranquil and steady. Although you ought not to cultivate any artificial poses, you must nonetheless learn to control all your movements and to regulate properly the deportment of all parts of your body. This is something that must be carefully taught to children. You realize, yes, if you grew up with this.
Oh my God, this is so triggering. The more you read this, the more I want to move.
I'm going to keep going to see what she does. Yeah.
No, don't do it. I had to train myself to stare at this camera throughout this podcast without moving. I was literally sitting on my hands for the first 2 episodes. Then I realized I could get away with moving my hands. The more you say I can't move my body, the more I want to move it. It's really, really, very, very badly triggering. I would have failed. No deportment whatsoever. It's actually really uncomfortable to hear it. Keep going if you need to.
I mean, I think I've made my point, right? It's like that's where this section is where the blowing your nose thing came from. It's all about, I mean, I think there's, you have to hold your head proper manner. right? But things like he said, okay, I'll keep reading. This is layered down in the same section. In a person's deportment, there must always be something sedate, even majestic. You ought to take care, however, that there is nothing in this to suggest pride or arrogance of spirit, for such attitudes greatly displease everyone. What will produce this sedateness is the simple modesty and wisdom that as a Christian you display in all your conduct. You are truly of noble birth, which should give you a clue here, right? For you belong to Jesus Christ and are a child of God, the Supreme Being. Hence, in your exterior there ought to be nothing vulgar. Everything in you ought to denote a certain air of nobility and greatness, a reflection of the power and majesty of God, whom you serve and who gave you being. This dignified appearance ought not to flow from arrogance or lead you to prefer yourself to others. Every Christian wishing to act according to the laws of the gospel ought to show honor and respect to all others, considering them as children of God and brothers of Jesus Christ, and himself as one burdened with sin, for which he must constantly humble himself, placing himself beneath everyone else. I told you who Salle was. I'll go back to him for a second, right? I do actually have my Wikipedia open so I can read from my Wikipedia. Salle was born to a wealthy family in Reims, in France, in 1651. He was the eldest child of Louis de La Salle and Nicole Mouet de Bruyere. Nicole's family was a noble one and ran a very successful winery business. Ooh, she was a relative of Claude Mouet, founder of Mouet et Chandon. We could drink champagne. Here we go.
Ooh.
Cheers.
Yeah. I need a glass now.
He actually was tonsured at age 11. They expected him to enter the church. But blah blah. He was noble, and he's considered a saint because he opened schools for the poor. But he's trying to ennoble them.
He's written his own culture into the program.
E-duchies,
E-duchies.
he's trying
the De La Salle duchies.
The De La Salle. He's trying to ennoble all of these poor children. I mean, there's Christianity in that, and he's like contesting the social class and the distinctions there, which the English were actually very concerned about in the 19th century. They're very concerned about making sure that the Sunday schools are free and open to the working classes and such like that. But that I realized in working through both of these, so much of we think of as Christian behavior is folded into what we think of as aristocratic behavior, which is what Norbert Elias was actually doing in that study of the etiquette. He was showing the way in which the nobility trained themselves to behave in certain ways, and therefore, if you want to be considered in that passage I just read you, LaSalle is saying, De La Salle, whichever he is, if you want to be considered noble, you're Christian, you're going to behave well, you're going to be, carry yourself well. Most of what his etiquette book is about is court behavior.
Mimicking the aristocracy.
Right.
Which is interesting because then
which just keep going.
They're saying that the working class etiquette is inadequate.
Yes.
Which is another problem. Because that is kind of a reflection of their judgment on their own subjects as aristocrats.
They're disgusting.
Yeah.
At this, I remembered this just so after the Man Born to Be King, after Sayers' radio show when did they broadcast it? In the 40s. Why can't I can't find that. Anyway, they follow it with the Life of Christ interlude, which is a weekly show, and it's like broadcast so that more children are hearing this than like anything else. And there's, you're saying bureaucratic. There's Butler Education Act of 1944 and the subsequent Education Scotland Act of 1946. This legislation, for the first time ever, mandated that schools begin every school day with the corporate act of Christian worship. So it's not actually until the 40s they make this official in the schools. And in England and Wales, for the first time, required classes in religious knowledge, which she comments, a misnomer, as the intent was included classes in Christian knowledge. And they use this Life of Christ interlude, but this is very fascinating with what we're talking about with LaSalle. Like The Man Born to be King, the Life of Christ interlude was a product of World War II. Specifically, the wartime evacuation of children, as well as pregnant women and mothers of young children from congested urban districts. The resulting collision and combustion of regional identities, rural and urban sensibilities, class expectations and perceptions, and bureaucratic stupidities created, quote, the scandal of the evacuees in both the media and popular consciousness. The stories are legion. The children who defecated in the corner of the drawing room. The little boy who was gobsmacked to discover there were people so wealthy they had special clothes just to sleep in. The girl who wrote home, quote, they call this spring, Mum, and they have one down here every year.
Wow.
Yep. And then they find out, they talk to the kids, and the children don't know Christianity, so they need to educate them, right? I mean, this is, we could tell different versions of the story. It's like, Christianity is a constant desire for education, which is one thing. But the sort of, what would Jesus do, the behavior, what counts as Christian? I mean, we're dealing with this right now in, your culture, Australia, America, right? The class clashes in behavior, and I obviously, as a Southerner, because I know, bless your heart, you're misbehaving, that there's the strong hierarchical class expectation is playing out in very interesting ways here too, because when people are saying people are misbehaving, I usually hear the class categories, which my husband, who's English, tells me I can't because I'm American and we have no class, but the South does. And the racial disparities are interestingly overlaid with class expectations and distinctions. I think I like Ye so much because he actually makes sense to me, because Chicago blacks speak Southern. They make sense. They know how to behave as ladies and gentlemen because of the social expectations of politeness that come from the South.
You have a shared cultural history.
We have a shared cultural history.
Yeah.
Which
we would seem very impolite to people in Chicago.
Well, possibly, but we're also good at, we're also good at navigating, bless your heart, failures of etiquette, because you don't want to draw attention to anybody's failure of etiquette, because that makes them sad and embarrassed. So here, the one place, and I found this like entertaining and delightful, the one place where LaSalle actually seemed to be drawing on a Bible story for his teaching in it was, of all of the stories, right? It's like, class, guess which one it is? The Visitation. And if, okay, that makes no sense to you, see? You don't visit. Visiting is a thing. I grew up being told you must go visit. The old woman visits. Visiting.
Yeah. No, visits. I understand that. We get visits. We get visits.
Chat. Look at like chat who were listening to me. I can go back to my live chat. Annie. Annie and Isaiah Z says, I always thought the first place you learned how to be a Christian was the home. Yes, but there's layers in it, right? So does the equation of manners and Christian virtue come after capitalism? What we're dealing with, I think, is a capitalist version of virtue. And what we're going, I had a very ambitious like syllabus for this particular episode. We were going to go back to the Middle Ages. Guess what? Part 358. That realizing with this episode, we're needing to unpack this whole claim of etiquette from, it's like show that the anglicized version of the white 90 Jesus, who is sentimentally appropriate, has one register of character. But the Catholic, I don't know, is it Spanish? Is it Southern? Is it Mediterranean? Right. All of there's other cultures other than the English, which is also, I think, a subset of English, right? Because the Southern American is also part of that something. That we've gotten tangled up, etiquette, morals, virtue, Christ-like, in ways that is very difficult for people to just articulate, because if it's rude to blow your nose on the Russias, does that mean it's unchristian? I think is the problem. But we'll go back to how to behave on a visit.
Well,
no, go ahead.
I'll tell you my story later. No, I was just going to say the Easter celebrations that we would take part in, there used to be fireworks that would be let off everywhere, and then flares would be let off. Then basically anything that could be lit on fire was purchased and then lit on fire. And this was done with no safety barriers or anything. It was just expected that it's Easter, we're going to say Christos Anesti, everyone's going to yell out Christos Anesti, and then things are going to be lit on fire, so leave if you don't want to be around the burning things. That was just socially expected. So yeah, I'm thinking like to contrast the politeness of, oh, that's not safe, or you've got to think about your neighbors because you could hurt them. That wasn't considered unchristian. It was just, no, we're partying now because Christ just got resurrected. We're going to light some things on fire. Get out of the way if you are in a situation where you're too feeble to be around burning things.
Right.
The whole community would light things on fire. We get the yayas and, the old people out of the way, and the little kids. But apart from that, everyone else was burning things. My point is that that would seem extremely irresponsible, impolite, and rude, because, but it wasn't.
Well, so thematically, we start with the e-duchies and how to behave on the internet and stuff like that. What Salle is describing is a court culture, right? He's describing, and that's, again, I'll say it again, that why Norbert Elias brought it into his civilizing process is that he saw that the nobility was restraining themselves for the sake of the bureaucracy, right? You're right. You're spot on with saying this is a bureaucratic sort of thing. And the,
well, they have to because they have to manage other people.
Right.
If they're out of control, they're incapable of doing their job as aristocracy. So it comes with the job. You don't attain a position of nobility unless you act like the nobility were acting, right? If you're out of control, you're incapable of governing a country. You have to be the most disciplined of anyone in the country in order to be at that position, or else everything falls apart. The king is the first slave of the country.
Well, this also, it fits with what the British are going through in the 19th century when they're trying to rule their empire. That's public school education and stiff upper lip.
Yeah, it's not loosey-goosey or
white man's burden and stuff. It's talking to themselves about how you can't lose it when you're in these administrative situations. Yes. So then we're ending up with like the Normans and the English and the aristocrats and like who is Christian? Is it just the nobility, or is it these horrible kids pooping in your drawing room? Are they Christian?
Yeah, lighting things on fire.
But maybe the disart is like, what's the difference between Christian and civil? And then the problem being, of course, that Christianity is in fact an urban religion. It's focused on a city, Jerusalem. It spreads through cities, all the cities that Paul preached in, Rome. It is centered administratively in cities, bishops. Right. It's interesting how it's not a peasant's religion. That's why they're pagans or peasants, or rustics. Right. It's somehow tied up with being literally
Those
civil.
nasty villains.
Sorry?
Oh, I said those nasty villains.
Those nasty
The
villains, right?
nasty villains.
But then you're
Yeah.
also, you know, obliged to bring Christianity to all those nasty villains and preach to them and teach them how to behave. And what's, you know, both the British and Salle with his Christian brother, it's like you're going to get them to behave proper, right?
Which means noble
Right,
or aristocratically.
right.
Okay, but why? Is that necessary for somebody's salvation? I have to play devil's advocate now.
I'm going to read about visiting.
Okay.
Okay, so visits.
Ignore me, fine.
No, I think that's the actual question. Okay, so I'm going to ignore it.
Oh, okay.
Article 1. The duty that decorum imposes on you to make visits. The frame of mind you must have when visiting. If only my mother had shown me this. Okay, but we're Presbyterians, right? I grew up Presbyterian. We're Adam Smithians, right? We worry about feelings and sentiment. But here it is. Okay, living in the world as you do, you cannot excuse yourself from paying visits from time to time and from receiving them. This is an obligation that decorum imposes on all lay people. You're obliged to visit! Even the most blessed Virgin, although she lived a very retired life, paid a visit to her cousin Elizabeth. Luke 138. It would seem that the Holy Gospel relates this in some detail, precisely to have this example serve as a model for us. Okay, this is the problem of reading, it's like Jesus obviously does teach people behavior. But what behavior and where is it? And so that, you know, the handbooks like this over the centuries, it's like, here's a model in the scriptures. Okay, but it's interesting that this is the main one that LaSalle picks up. Jesus Christ also paid visits several times out of simple charity, for he was certainly not obliged to do so. To understand clearly and to ascertain correctly the occasions when you ought to make a visit, be convinced that Christian decorum must be governed in this manner only by justice and charity, and that it obliges you to make visits only out of necessity to show someone a token of your respect or to cultivate union and charity. This is not like visiting the poor and the sick. It is in decorum and charity and occasions when decorum founded on justice dictates a visiting would be, for example, when a father has a sick child or a child a sick parent. Each is bound to visit the sick person in order to give all the help that Christian piety and justice as well as decorum require. But there's others, he goes on about, you must also be careful in visiting not to stay too long, which ordinarily is boring or disagreeable to others. With regard to the people you visit, make sure they are not living dissolute or scandalous lives, and that nothing in their conversation suggests impiety or a disregard for religion. Decorum does not allow you to have any dealings with such people. How to enter the house of the person you're visiting. When you go to call on someone, remember Holman Hunt's light of the world, Jesus is knocking on the door, right? When you go to call on someone and find the door of the house shut, it would be very impolite to bang on it or knock more than once. Knock gently, and then wait patiently until someone comes to open the door. And then it's like how to say your name while waiting in a room or in an antechamber. It's contrary to decorum to walk about. This is forbidden in the homes of the nobility. Under no circumstances may you hum or whistle. It is a matter of refinement to remain with your hat off in waiting rooms and antechambers, each when no one else is there. When visiting a person of eminent rank, take care never to wear a hat or to sit down with your back turned towards his portrait or toward that of anyone who has a right to your respect. Hat etiquette. Very important.
Yeah. People don't wear hats anymore. Not really.
We can do a whole stream on costume.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, he's not telling them to take their shoes off. I just find this interesting that they've taken this visiting etiquette from the scriptures, but the people in the Middle East, they removed their shoes.
It's not from the scriptures. It's from
it's just odd.
18th century French court culture, right? You can greet some in one of three different ways. The manner for ordinary situations is to remove your hat first with the right hand and lower it with your arm fully extended. This is like stage directions for the Three Musketeers. Come on. Let the hat rest turned outward on your right thigh and leave your left hand free. Second, look gently and politely at the person you are greeting. Third, drop your glance and bow. Fourth, if you wish to move forward, begin by moving the right foot forward. If you wish to withdraw, move the foot back, left foot back. If you are passing someone you wish to greet, first move forward and towards his side. Then, as you pass in front of him, turn slightly toward him and offer a greeting. I'm probably not supposed to be scratching my head. It's probably rude to touch my hair. In fact, it is.
I was going to say, no wonder they started importing so many drugs. You're going to be high alert just for the direction of your hat in the antechamber.
Well, I have here the Magi, and I was like, the instructions on we have instructions on giving and receiving presents. Let's sort of flow through, like if we're going to map these onto the life of Christ, right? We say, okay, so Mary visits Elizabeth, but like this is not visiting in the sense of Mary goes to visit Elizabeth. It is how to do Jane Austen level sort of social visits, right? You're going around leaving your card, whether you talk, it's like all of that, very literally decorous. He also has things on, for example, okay, apparently Tissot, whose pictures I'm showing now, didn't do a Magi giving the present, so I don't have that one. But so, for example, when you give a present to someone, it is contrary to decorum to praise it to the skies, as though encouraging the receiver to show a deeper appreciation for it. I've got you this great thing, right? If others praise the object, you may say that you wish it were even more beautiful, and so in keeping with the merits of the person who received it. It would be very rude to remind someone later of a good deed you did for him, for this would seem to imply something of a reproach. Or you could say that, gift giving is Christian because the Magi bring gifts to Christ, and therefore we're going to learn how to give gifts. But this is not at that level. Or, let's see, we have, oh yes, this was a good one. I have how to speak of people and things. Is that what the people and things? Haha. Okay, this was not where I was going, but on the picture I have now, the Jesus and the apostles in Jerusalem, and they're looking around at the sights. I'll get to that in a second. But in company, some people speak only of what they like or of things they particularly cherish. If they are fond of a dog, a cat, or a bird, or some other animal, they make these pets the constant subject of their conversation. Don't do that. Okay, let me. No. It's Oh, well, I guess it was in the peoples and things. Haha. It is prudent when someone is using insulting language for you not to reply in kind and not to undertake to defend yourself. It is better to pretend that you take the whole thing as a joke. And if someone else comes to your defense, you ought to show that you are not upset by what was said. This is very useful on the internet. It is characteristic of a truly wise person never to be upset by anything.
A wise person or a dead person? Are you dead?
No.
Then you won't be upset by anything.
What decorum prescribes with regard to praise and flattery. It is always uncouth for you to praise yourself and to brag. This is not appropriate because as a Christian, you ought to make yourself known only by your deeds. Only your actions must speak for you. You must never speak of yourself to say either good or evil. Okay, now, if you behave this way, people will definitely think you're polite. But the sort of overlapping of whether or not it's about being Christian is interesting because if I go through, I was trying to find pictures that fit with the scenarios in here. There's one where he's talking about whether or not you should praise a building or something. And so I said, okay, the apostles there. Oh, yes, there's lots of dinner manners. So we have
they're eating with their hands.
How to eat soup. Oh. It's extremely improper at table to smell the dishes or to give them to someone else to smell. You are never, I always think people posting online all their food pictures are very rude. You are never permitted, if you detect some bad odor in the food, to call this to the attention of others. He quotes every so often from Ecclesiasticus, but that's kind of it.
So, what this sounds like to me is a way of reducing the sensuality of your behavior, even though it's highly feelings based. It's a denial of, and I don't mean sexual when I say sensuality, I mean like the actual sense of the body is being denied, which would make sense if you were trying to discipline yourself for rulership over other people. But yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Well, it's all very disincarnate. It's the same. We have rules about holding our body, about gestures with our body, about touching our body, about moving our body, and all of the behaviors. So there's more sections of like conversation and laughter, gaming, singing, amusements not permitted, giving and receiving presents, compliments. I mean, but if you say, is it virtuous? Right? There's nothing in this necessarily about, in fact, virtue. It's decorum and politeness and civility.
So you could have in under this kind of social situation, you can potentially have an incredibly unvirtuous but polite group of people. It's there's it almost encourages it actually as a kind of release valve from the strictures of all of these micro neuroses.
Maybe.
I don't know. It seems like it.
Well, I keep coming, in my thinking, I'm getting around to, so is this simply, okay, it's court, which we're playing with the e-duchies and the problem of the internet. It's kind of military behavior because this is a aristocratic culture. Yes. And as what you're saying is people needing to rule over others.
Yes.
Need to know how to behave, because otherwise people won't accept your rule. I mean that
well, they have to. They have to impose that the illusion of being in control comes from people believing that you're capable of it. So you have to behave like this. You know what I mean? You're not going to inspire a loyal populace if you look like you're completely out of control and you're not going to help them if the neighboring duchy decides to invade yours and storm the castle. Right. People want to see a disciplined aristocracy because they're outsourcing their problem. It's like, okay, that guy's going to solve the problem. We get invaded, who's going to fix it? Those guys. They're never caught drunk and picking their nose on a Tuesday morning. It's like they have this projected image of discipline and an awareness of things that other people can ignore, maybe.
But then we're in a very difficult situation, right? Because you've muted yourself. I can tell that. Yeah.
Somebody has stormed the castle.
So it's storming the castle and breaching the internet spaces. Well, that passage I read from Salle where he's talking about, if you are noble because you are Christ's, has one flavor of it, and then I've gone to places I didn't. I mean, it's like I was going to talk about the children and the education, and it seems like we're behaving and stuff. And as we've been talking, realizing how how difficult this is as a class problem. And then I started thinking, right now I have Jesus preaching to the people, and so of course LaSalle has instructions on meetings and conversations, right? The truth and sincerity that decorum requires in speech. Yes, or things like in the same vein, the royal prophet David, also instructed in the rules of decorum as he was in true piety, says that if you wish to live a life of happiness, you must keep watch over your tongue so that you speak no falsehood. While the wise man, it's Ecclesiasticus, wishes you to look upon lying as something so detestable that even the thief, he says, is preferable to the habitual liar, for the lie is always found in the mouths of vicious people. You might say that even if you fall into no other vice, frequent lying is enough to push you quickly into a vicious life. Jesus Christ explains why this is so when he tells us the devil is the father of lies. What's funny is all of this, and once you go through it, saying, yes, we should behave like this. We should be decorous and polite and civil. And it's very hard. I mean, we've had this problem in the e-world of people think it's just funny to be as rude as possible. And it feels both like it drags people down into vicious vice. If you're vicious in one thing, if you're lying, you can't regulate anything in your life. But on the other hand, as we're talking, it's like, well, how much of this is, the upper class is just looking down on those horrible, uncouth lower classes, and then reproducing the other kind of division that we're watching in our society of the elites. I mean, in the United States, the coastal elites hating all of the flyover people, right? You're just those disgusting, uncivilized, bores. How do we find our way out of this?
I don't know. I think that probably the only way of doing it would be to have etiquette developed in a situation where you have a hierarchy that is not purely aristocratic. I have one in mind, but nobility is perpetual. You're born into nobility or you're not. So it's exclusive, and it's never going to be influenced by the peasantry. The villains, these nasty villains, they don't influence the nobles. So the problem is that this society needs a different kind of hierarchy that can be influenced by villains and doesn't become crystallized by the strictures, this militaristic, bureaucratic strictures of the life of aristocrats, because it chokes culture. They're necessary, but they're not life. They're there to protect life. They have the same function as a good fence in their proper place, I think. The castle is not the castle's to protect the surrounds of the castle. The castle doesn't exist. Like you said, the city and the countryside don't exist independently of each other. The city creates a countryside. So the castle's there. It cannot function independently of the countryside around it because it exists as a castle specifically to protect the countryside. So the aristocracy in their proper place exists to protect non-aristocrats. So this is where I'm thinking imposing their way of life on non-nobles. I don't think it is going to be good for a country.
Well, I'm moving through the
There
it is. I finally found the picture I was looking for, which is the one that's labeled in the catalog as Jesus telling the apostles about how the first will be last and the last will be first. And
yes.
I mean, the inversions of hierarchies is one of the things that Christianity is always pointing to. And of course, in the 19th century, Nietzsche famously talking about it's the slaves. I think it's Nietzsche. Everybody thinks it's Nietzsche. That, you know, Jesus, with his teaching, kept inverting all of the hierarchies of education, of prestige, of service, and lifting up the poor to be, I mean, noble in the way that Salle is trying to lift up his students, his boys. I mean, he brought what it said in the Wikipedia is he first brings the teacher, the poor teachers into his home, which drives his family nuts, and then he loses the house. Yeah, in 1681, de La Salle decided he would take a further step into helping. Oh no, wait. So it's like La Salle knew the teachers' lives were struggling, lacking leadership, purpose, and training, and he found himself taking increasingly deliberate steps to help this small group of men with their work. First, in 1680, he invited them to take their meals in his home, as much to teach them table manners as to inspire and instruct them in their work. This crossing of social boundaries was one that his relatives found difficult to bear. In 1681, de La Salle decided that he would take a further step. He brought the teachers into his own home to live with him. De La Salle's relatives were deeply disturbed. His social peers were scandalized. A year later, when his family home was lost at auction because of a family lawsuit, de La Salle rented a house into which he and the handful of teachers moved.
Oh, well, I'm just thinking, like, David didn't start out as a noble either. It's funny that there's a, you know, this reference to David civilizing people by explaining how to behave,
Right.
but his nobility existed before he'd even set foot in a court. That was inborn. It had nothing to do with the social class. He was a shepherd. His nobility came from his faith in God, the God of Israel, which is why he ended up slaying the giant in the first place. You know, it was like he was great because he was able to overlook the material categories that everyone else was stuck in, which is Christ-like in my mind. Saul was the greatest physically, and he couldn't do it, and everybody was too terrified of the Philistine champion to even try. He didn't care. He said it's irrelevant, you know. We have the God of Israel, so who's the uncircumcised Philistine over there? You know, I'll do it. That made him great. That made him noble. I don't see there being influence of court life on his nobility at all. It was maybe him being taken out of court that made him such a wonderful king, because he spent most of his time running away from Saul, you know. It was the constant guerrilla warfare and being with men that he had to develop a trust with under persecution, and, you know, he continuously wrenched away from the comfort of the aristocracy, knowing that he would go back into it. That made him a good king. I don't know. To me, that seems like the good pattern for us. Not getting stuck in an aristocratic mindset. Being like at home in caves or in palaces and not caring in either direction where you are. That makes you royal. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm wanting to make sure I pull all of these threads together, because yes, exactly. we've gotten to the place where the fascinating thing about all of this, you're not being Christ-like, you're behaving Christ-like, is it's all happening in these very ordinary social situations for the most part, right? We're not in war. In war, people have to behave well because otherwise everybody dies because the company falls apart. And so Annie, Isaiah and Annie Z is saying, I like to look at having manners as wanting to make others feel comfortable. Annie. Yeah, but sometimes we have to say things that make people really uncomfortable, and then we're in where we are, right? In the problem of the Christ-like, which is where we've been pushing up against this, right? Everybody uses "you're not being Christ-like" in the guise of either the Presbyterian, Smithian, Anglican sentiment criticism, right? You're not being nice, and we will now shame you because then we'll get you to behave, and you don't want to you don't want to be shamed because you don't want us to talk nasty about you because of what you've done. And then from the other side, the aristocratic civilizing fashion that De La Salle is trying to teach his boys and the teachers is also still within the don't make a disturbance mode. And you will always be called out for not being Christ-like whenever you make people feel uncomfortable. You're not being nice, your manner, you're not behaving properly, your manners are. Or mainly that. It's like Christ-like should be in the white 90, undisturbing, uncomplicated. Don't make people feel sad, because that's not Christ-like to be nasty and not nice.
Nope.
The sermon for this week, the reading for this week was the sermon when there's the storm in the boat, and Jesus is asleep, and the apostles are going, "We're gonna drown," right? And you're in the boat, and then when Jesus wakes up and calms the storm and everything. But it's this is my general problem. And we had a great sermon at Cantius. Father Matthew did a wonderful sermon on the boat. He loves this story, I think, because we're constantly in the boat. Here we are in the Ark. We're sailing around in the internet and trying to make sense of the chaos and turbulence and flooding and nastiness and everything. And there's always this, I think, the problem of, I think the magic of manners, I'm just thinking about this right now, the magic of manners is that that's never going to happen, right? If you can just, and I realize this as a Southerner, as all sorts of other things, right? But I know that as a Southern, if I can just behave well, everything will always go smoothly, right? There's this sort of courtier level of, don't misspeak, don't misbehave, don't make people recognize, embracing my whatever inner autist, saying, no, I actually as justice have to say things that make people kind of unhappy sometimes because, for example, in class, I have to say, with the horror of dealing with being socially polite, I have to control who gets to talk when.
Yes.
You know how hard that is. It's because at a dinner party, you're just like, oh, anybody can talk, and I'm going to, do gentle conversation over here. And as long as everyone's having, chatting and being polite and stuff, it's great, right? But in class, I actually have to say you, not you. Be quiet. No, you can talk more. And by the end of a class, sometimes I'm like in, shudders. It's an interesting, portmanteau word there, because I've had to, I've shattered, right? I'm just shattered by the impoliteness of the things I've had to do in order to do my job. Which, I mean, it's just true when we talk about the aristocracy and they have to behave like this in order to rule and so forth. But there are other ways in which you have to also be impolite in the nice sense in order to, for example, in our world,
Yeah.
right? It's like you can't just let people do what they like or want. Sometimes you have to kick them out of your group because they're behaving in a way that destroys the purpose of the exercise. And here's Jesus in the storm boat, and the apostles are saying, "You're not taking care of us." But they all want to. I think I'm going to go to, they want to avoid having people talk nasty behind their backs, which is the picture that's showing now. The evil they're taking counsel to have Jesus destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that Sanhedrin vibe. That's strong.
Well, this is just, I think it's I'm not even sure who they are, right? It's just, it was called evil discussion. I mean, this is what Adam Smith is trying desperately to avoid all the time, is make sure nobody ever says anything nasty about you. Make sure, was there a Jewish term for this?
Oh, you mean the shit talking prohibition.
Yeah. But
yeah.
that will be done to you if you misbehave and get outside of the community. They're very aristocratic in this. That's right. We will cut you and not talk to you. Like,
yeah, if you've got an evil tongue, evil tongue.
We will make sure not to allow you to speak in this conversation. I know how that works.
Sounds like Twitter, doesn't it?
Well, I think it sounds like, I mean, I think it's our default, right? I think it's socially default, because we can probably find good reasons for it. It's like, needing to get rid of the person that's disrupting the group or something like that. So how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
You're going to find the disruptor and you're going to get rid of them. Is that Christ-like?
Yeah. That sounds
finding the disruptor and getting rid of them? No,
not finding the disruptor, but being the disruptor.
Which is why they give him to Pilate dressed up as a king, right? It's the I mean, this is constantly the irony of it. Is like, Christ does not get to be in the white nightie, unbruised, unhumiliated, unshamed, unlovely. I mean, that is literally what the prophecy, and I'm now going to have to look that up. I'll spurg on this for a second. The prophecy in Isaiah that says he was ugly, right? And this apparently created a lot of problems for the British artists, right? Because they had to make him look beautiful. But wait, no, in Isaiah, who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? And he shall grow up as a tender plant before him, and as a root out of a thirsty ground. There is no beauty in him, nor comeliness, and we have seen him, and there was no sightliness, that we should be desirous of him. Despised, and the most abject of men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with infirmity. And his look was as it were hidden and despised, whereupon we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our infirmities and carried our sorrows, and we have thought him as it were a leper, and as one struck by God and afflicted. But he was wounded for our iniquities, he was bruised for our sins. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his bruises we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, every one hath turned aside into his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He's a shepherd because he's humiliated and despised and carries all of our sins. Like literally the opposite of Adam Smithian loveliness.
It is. Because sentiment can't. Yeah. Can you imagine? Very difficult to be the Messiah when you ruled by sentiment. Like.
We got there. It only took us 2 hours and 32 minutes, but okay, whatever. Yes, exactly. right? It's like the facts don't care about your feelings. Phooey on that. We're driven, our entire social order, thank you Adam Smith, the Presbyterians, my Southern ancestors, driven by this terror of being not lovely. And then on the opposite side we have, bless his heart, Saint Jean-Baptiste teaching everyone to behave with, you know, decorum, and there's no depth or it's not Christ-like.
No.
Because Christ-like is being willing to have all those people talking about you behind your back and carrying it anyway.
Yeah.
For their sake, to care for those sheep children, to care for, I mean, that's what's interesting. De La Salle did it. He had his neighbors talking against him, saying, why are you building all these people into your house? Why are you caring about these, you know, uncouth teachers to have no table manners? I mean, it's so interesting. It's the more we try. It's like I've been told, you know, it's like, what am I doing hanging out on the internet all the time with these uncouth people that aren't my actual students? Well,
we might be students.
Teaching them to scan, for goodness sake. I wonder if you all know how to use a knife and fork sometimes. And I mean, that's a paradox, right? It's the more we're lifted up by our desire to lift up all human beings out of the muck of embarrassment and shame, as Jesus did constantly in his miracles. There's a lot of Tisso's pictures of his miracles. That we get so then worried about being Christ-like that we stop being Christ-like. I like that.
It's good.
We're worrying so much about being called Christ-like in the white 90 that we are becoming too afraid to appear humiliated and shamed before the world, which is literally the point of taking up our cross and being willing to bear it with him.
The indignity paradox. It's good. It's good. Well, he wore a crown of thorns, right?
He has to be this one. I like this one at Tisso's. It's Christ hearing his judgment, and he's in a crowd, right? It's the remember, Tissot is one of the ones. He's Roman Catholic, so these are actually Catholic images, and so they have a sort of mystery to them that I think the Protestant images do lack. But and Tissot has wonderful angels and sort of blue angels showing up to Mary and such. But the British liked him, the Victorian British liked him because he went and took lots of photographs in Palestine to get the locations right. So they figured he passed the empirical test, the historical empirical test. And here he is, this scene of the square in Jerusalem where Pilate is sitting in his portico in judgment, and the crowd is there hearing Jesus, watching Jesus hear his sentence to be crucified. I feel suddenly quite affected.
Yeah, stripped of all dignity.
All of it.
Yeah. Which is a thing the problem we have now wanting to become Christians or wanting to develop Christian civilization. Which would mean, ideally, we become more and more undignified compared to what we've been living in. So the previous hierarchy has to be abandoned.
I see what I see it as is we are having constantly in ourselves to fight the fear of being unlovely.
Mm.
I think Smith was right about why shaming works. That it works because we're
Yes.
so terrified of not being lovely. And that's like the Isaiah I just read. It's like Jesus was unlovely. There is no beauty in him, nor comeliness. We have seen him, and there is no sightliness, and that we should be desirous of him, the man of sorrows. He's and in the medieval depictions, which Tissot is actually, I mean, he's Roman Catholic, so he's getting closer to the imagery I'm familiar with. They go for it with the crucifixion images. I mean, our our favorite director Mel Gibson did too, and it's interesting to realize.
Yes.
I mean, the Passion of the Christ was Catholic, and it's horrific, right? In the degree to which he's showing
Yes.
Christ transformed from this, beautiful masculine carpenter cares for his mom, to this just the Isaiah passage, right? Just from head to toe, nothing but wounds. And I mean, and in the Passion of the Christ, they do it, in kind of real time. I mean, the movie's not quite the full day, obviously, because it's not a full day to watch it. But you feel like how quickly Jesus went from alive to dead, from the garden where he's praying to his arrest to this, judgment to the crucifixion to dead in less than 24 hours. And it's interesting in the British discussion about how to represent him, that they don't want him to lose his awe and majesty and dignity, and it's humiliating having him speak in ordinary colloquial 20th century English. All of this constant, and I say this resets all the time, right? And I do say this is it's a problem in our e-duchies, because like you might get embarrassed in a conversation, you might lose an argument, you might be a little bit made ridiculous or something like that. But the problem in our lives is you may recover from that embarrassment and then be tempted not to go through it again.
Yeah.
And that is going to hit every single time, right? I've been conscious of that myself. Is like we're doing it right now, right? That Three Cheers for White Men was, I published that post in 2015. The first flame out attack on me because of it was in January 2016. The next year was, been blogging about Milo. 2017 coming up, day after tomorrow, the anniversary of Berkeley, and that humiliation, and what followed on that. Then it's like it seems like every single year there's a new version of this test.
Yeah.
And I mean, Yay for me has been a strong one this past year, because it's like, say, I was introduced to his music by Jonathan Pageau at Cantius, and by thinking about what he's saying as Christ is King, he's standing there saying Jesus is King, and white lives matter. And I love, and I'm not even sure I can say it right now, I still have that little bit of decorum left, that I don't want that shame out there. That's the test.
Yeah.
And
he wants the end of Adam Smith on the culture.
Oh, Ye definitely does, and he is literally one of the, on the one hand, feel that you can say passed that test, that he was willing to look at Christ as King and say everything for you.
Yeah.
I will not protect myself from the shame.
No, it does. It keeps coming back. Like it's the same thing. It is. I think it's especially potent for it's been especially potent for Catholics that have integrated into the Whig system in Australia, because they've suddenly come into a culture that has different shame mechanisms. And I watched the generational changes in the Wogs here. They became more anglicized. They lost their Mediterranean approach to doing things and to behavior. So not entirely, but I saw how they changed. And then you see it in the great grandchildren, great grandchildren, where they start to reflect on their grandparents' behavior. Obviously, it's a generation gap thing, which is going to exist anyway, but it's more this kind of quaint nostalgia and like a amused. There's a kind of amused and amused embarrassment at the way that the grandparents are so ethnic. When I see that in someone, I think you're dying now. You need to stop. And not all of my friends have it, but some of them do. And the ones that have it, they seem the most miserable. The ones that don't are the ones that are, they're rejecting Adam Smith. They can feel that they're constantly being offered an exchange. It's like, okay, you can exchange your ethnicity and you'll get this more respectable standing in this particular system. But it's a trick, because they're losing their expressiveness. They're losing their ability to look ridiculous, which was the key to the joy of that culture. That's what I liked about being around, and I still like about being around Mediterranean peoples. They seem more more ready to be ridiculous.
I put it to you possibly because you were visiting, not in theirs. I mean, I think Jesus is also constantly showing that shame stuff reactivates all the time.
But I suppose I'm just kind of giving a picture of what that looks like, in that's how I understand the problem in this particular, like in that particular example. I'm just giving an example of it. The shame thing exists in all cultures, right. I know, but like that's the best way I can kind of describe it, where you go, okay, how does it look? It looks like, to me, being brought into an environment where you have to maintain status in polite society. What does that, migration is the same experience. I suppose that's why I'm using the example, because you're abandoning something that you are doing to assimilate into this new place.
Right. Well, and this will be the frustration that people have with the go back to Adam Smith and all the movement of peoples is, I think, fundamentally the reason that people don't like one, economic and land ownership and actual safety and stuff like that. But when you move across cultures, you're not affected by all of their shame mechanisms or their behavior rules. And so those new people coming in just seem unruly and to have no rules. They probably do have rules, but you don't know theirs.
Oh yeah.
The Anglo version is the one that we're working with in this context, and we've looked at that level of the way they're working with sentiment and stuff like that. But I think a lot of what's the cultural, which is a new, we're now sailing off into another topic right now, having like gazed at Christ and wept a little bit. The feeling of not having control over those unruly masses is because those unruly masses won't accept your shame mechanisms.
Well, yes. So it's having a completely different set of shame mechanisms. Right. Christ has a different set of shame mechanisms to the world.
Yes.
Being the Messiah. This is kind of, I was trying to link it to. We're supposed to be dealing with the shame mechanisms of the kingdom, not the shame mechanisms of this world.
Beautifully put. Yes.
Yeah. I had to get there.
You were starting to party with the Greeks. We actually have a
yes,
we have a super chat that's fine. It's a coffee. Libelul. I need a pronunciation guide. I'm so embarrassed. Just testing out super chat. Let me buy you a coffee. Thank you. So yes, that we should be operating by Christ's shame of the kingdom, and we keep falling back into the shame of the world.
Yeah.
There, we solved it.
Easier said than done.
Well, so we're back to the shepherd and his sheep, but recognizing that it was always an image of Isaiah taking care of us, but to get to him holding the little sheep in the white 90 and being the Chad guy with the sheep, he had to go through, let's go back through that a little bit, an awful lot. And I think we also have themes that we want to build towards about masculinity, which we've kind of gestured towards here, femininity, all of those. But I've been thinking about the Adam Smith thing, recognizing that, I did like Adam Smith for, the brief moment that I was labeling myself conservative, which, okay, fine, we've sailed off onto another labeling, but that literally the Wealth of Nations is underpinned by a morality of feelings. What's a hilarious recognition of, oh my goodness, it's the two sides of the same coin phenomenon again, right? It's like you get free market capitalism, SJWs, and it's the same guy.
The bureaucracy of feelings.
The bureaucracy of feelings. So, my dear, that was another long one. These etiquette ones are really clearly a lot of work here. We've had Mel, and John says hello all. Mel is saying Kyrie eleison and sea shanties. Mel asking, De La Salle is a baddie. No, I think we're just all sinners in this. I mean, De La Salle is actually a saint. But the Christ-like problem, and I think actually Ye does that well in that song, is we're constantly using it as a shame mechanism to bash people back into the worldly behaviors. Right? That's not Christ-like. You shouldn't be yelling at me. And to be Christ-like is, it's like the willingness to take on the shame in order to not bow to the world, not take the ticket. I mean, big levels, but also not take the little tickets of, lying. Right? I read that passage from De La Salle about lying, turns you vicious like that. Lying in little things means you become, more and more worried about hiding. The shame kicks back in, right? So that we're trying to train ourselves out of that. And I'm finally back fencing, which is good, right? And fencing is a very physical way of making sure that you're having to deal with this constantly, because you just got hit. You have to acknowledge it. It's in the rules of the Salle. Salute your opponent and and acknowledge hits. Literally in the rules on the wall. It says, this is very aristocratic, right? Salute your opponent, acknowledge when you made the mistake and you got hit. You don't get to boast around and go, ha 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 ha, smack bash, right? I see you get that, right? I see that a lot in our e-duchies, where people they won't acknowledge when a good point has been made. They won't acknowledge when they lost track of the conversation and, said something that contradicts something later. It's like we got a whole layer of not, I think, intellectual problems here, but the constantly trying to make sure you're not being shamed, rather than just saying, oh wait, you made a good point, thank you, that taught me something. Or and conversely, rather than, I've been, people try to shame me all the time too, because I'm saying that's wrong. You said this later. Oh, well, now you're being nasty, you grandma. And I'm like, okay, but
nasty.
I still notice that you contradicted yourself, and I'm not going to be nice about it so that you like me. And don't make me feel unlovely, right? It's a it's a monastic discipline, a fencer's discipline, but it's this, ultimately we're trying not to let the fear of the shame prevent us from acknowledging the truth.
Yes. Which is what artists need to do, and art will die if we are unable to do this. And this is why art has died.
Yes.
Because artists are constantly living on the precipice of massive shame all the time. And the crushing neurosis over being judged by what we produce is almost excruciating at times. Even for basic things, because I mean, you have to be sensitive anyway. Not moral sensitivity sensitive, but you have to be sensitive to be a good artist in the first place, in the sense that you're plugging into feeling and energy and human nature and everything. Then you've got to produce your vision and perception of it all, what you want to say about everything, and then just invite judgment on yourself. It's horrible. And if you can't do it, you know, you're not going to make anything worth saying. The art that we're given is awful for a reason. People are not taking risks. They're terrified of being shamed of making the wrong art. As we saw with the pictures at the beginning, yes, that they were constantly being shamed by. I mean, going back to the Catholic, you know, it's like we don't want this to be too Catholic. We don't want this to be. It's like I had not put that together. And what you've just done beautifully, I think, is tie together the truth, the goodness, and the beauty. The art must be truthful, or it's ugly. Yes. Yeah. It has to be true, or it's not beautiful. Amen. Yeah. We've just created another record. I'm gonna go. Okay. You can't. We gotta say goodbye. Good night, everyone. Good day, everyone. Good day. Good night. Thank you so much for joining us. Those of you who stuck with us through this entire sailing. This was a big one, and I feel like we got to a good place. So we did. My name is like we should my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. We will have to practice our introductions to manage expectations. But this one, the managed expectations was Buona notte, Sailor Moon. We went on for a long time. I hope you enjoyed the journey. We hope you enjoyed the journey. Thank you for joining us. Good night.